most appalling things about the budget, as far as I was concerned, is that it provides ample evidence, if such was not sufficiently provided already, that Trudeau is exactly what you would be afraid of if you were afraid of him. He doesn't have an answer to a problem that isn't overwhelmingly predictable ideologically. It's like you don't even need him. You just have to run the ideology. It has the answers. What's the big problem? Equity between men and women. It's like, sorry, that's not the big problem. That's not even, you're not even scratching the surface of the problem with that approach. And your solutions, it's like you can learn those solutions your first week in women's studies. They're not solutions. They're the sorts of solutions that children toy with when they have no idea what they're contending with. Yeah, well, there's not a lot there, I'm afraid. Fixing these complex systems is unbelievably complicated, and you're likely to make them worse when you're mucking about with them haphazardly, right? And so it's way easier just to do this. Trudeau said it back in, wasn't it 2016? Why are half the cabinet women? Because it's 16 or 15? Yeah. Well, it's almost impossible to overstate how shallow that comment is, and how not only shallow, but it's also casually malevolent in an unconscious sense, because he had a job to do, which was to evaluate his MPs thoroughly and skeptically and pick the best people, period. But that isn't what he did. He said, oh, well, it's 2016, so I'll appoint half women. It's like, well, everybody gave him a pass on that, and so here we are. Now we have a budget that's equity-focused. Yeah, well, good luck with that. When I look at Trudeau, there's a couple of things that I see. I see someone who hasn't grown up. So he's Peter Pan. I see someone he knows how to behave in public. That's one thing you can say about him. He's got that easy charisma and charm that comes from being good-looking, being from a favored background, the favored background that he's from. He's got by on that. And the reason I believe that is because I don't believe that if he had any true character that he would have run, because he ran on the strength of his name, and he hadn't earned the right to do that. But people elected him, so here we are. And this is what we get. I mean, he pulled out the ideological card when he formulated the cabinet, and Canadians all went, oh, isn't that cute? It's like, no, it's not cute. It's not acceptable. And now we're paying the price for it. You know, they'd repaired the relationship. Well, that's the purpose. It's like when I go places now and people come to talk to me, that happens all the time.
I'd like to start with 12 rules. You call it an antidote to chaos. It sounds more like you're in that zone where you are somewhere between rule-bound and chaos. You're trying to, as an individual, navigate that path. How can an individual change without falling into chaos?
Well, part of it is that you don't want to bite off more than you can chew. You know, you should try to change something that is difficult, but where you have a moderate probability of succeeding. Or if you're feeling depressed and anxious, a fairly high probability of succeeding. So you have to, it's just as if you're dealing with a child, let's say. When you want to foster the development of a child, you set them a new task so that their skills expand. You don't want it to be so difficult that their probability of failure is overwhelming. There's no utility in that. But you don't want it to be so easy that they can already do it, right? And that it's also partly you don't want it to be so easy because there's no intrinsic joy of mastery in mastering a task that's too easy. So if you calibrate it properly, then you get to have your cake and eat it too, right? Because the skill expands. That's called the zone of proximal development. That was discovered by a Russian psychologist named Vygotsky. He was a very good psychologist. And one of the things he noted was that adults automatically talk to children at a level that slightly exceeds their current comprehension ability. We do that we don't have to be taught to do that. We do that automatically. And obviously we'd have to do that because otherwise children wouldn't learn how to talk. But you want to have yourself in the zone of proximal development all the time, really. Well, maybe not when you're relaxing, but generally you want to be in a place that you've reasonably well mastered, while at the same time extending your skills. It's optimal because then things are under control and turning out the way you need and want them to. but your ability to master new areas is also growing. And I would say that's associated with people's intrinsic sense of meaning. Now, the meaning is a real instinct, as far as I can tell, neurologically speaking, and it signals that not only are you somewhere that's working, but that you're getting better at the same time. So that's what an athlete does when he or she pushes past a limit. You don't want to hurt yourself, obviously, but you don't want to just stay, and you don't want to hurt yourself, and you don't want to be somewhere where you're completely incompetent. You want to be somewhere secure but challenging. And that's what makes your life meaningful.
But perhaps that's an antidote to modern parenting that you're proposing. A lot of you talk in the book about how happiness is not a reasonable goal, not a
it's a shallow goal, because the problem with happiness is that there's lots of times you're not going to be happy. I mean, life is hard. You don't have to scratch. This is one thing you learn as a clinical psychologist very rapidly, but I think people know this anyways. You don't have to scratch very far below the surface in most people's lives to find a pretty damn deep well of tragedy. And not only tragedy, but often malevolence, sometimes on their part, but sometimes because they've been subject to betrayal and abuse and scandal and all sorts of things. There's virtually no one who doesn't have that deeply embedded into their narrative. It's like happiness doesn't address that. You need a reason to keep you going when things are falling apart around you, because there's going to be a lot of your life where, you have a sick parent, or you have a sick child, or your health isn't good yourself, or your marriage is unstable at the moment, or you're dealing with a financial crisis, or it's just one thing after another. Everyone knows this. And so meaning is a much more robust antidote than happiness. Happiness is great, man. If it comes along, it's like, welcome.
Maternal love's love, blah, blah, blah. And Trudeau stood up and said, hang on, we don't use the word mankind, which the audience member had used. We actually like to say people kind. I hope he was joking. The professor joins us on the line. Jordan Peterson, good morning to you.
Good morning.
He must have been kidding, wasn't he?
No.
No?
No, and his new budget is completely focused on equity.
I mean,
that's the problem he thinks he needs to solve in Canada. That's the limit of his imagination, is to construct an entire federal budget to solve a problem that no one cares about, that doesn't exist.
Well, I think this country's rapidly charging down the same road. I know you've not been in the country for very long, but you're here at a sold-out speaking tour. We've had the Gender and Language Police in the last week, the Diversity Council of all things, suggesting that airline staff can't use the words sir and madam. I had to say, Jordan, I was very happy when the next day I got on a flight and the flight attendant said, watch out for your arm, Dahl, because I'm going to bang into it with a trolley. So sensible people are not taking any notice of this stuff, are they?
Yeah, but they will. You guys are on the same road that we're on in Canada, and it's worse than you think. So be prepared, because it's coming.
So tell me about the book. What motivated you to write 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos, and what does the book tell us?
Well, I'm trying to outline an alternative, I wouldn't say political path exactly, I would say an ethical path. We're on this journey in the West into identity politics, which is a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing on the left to re-divide us into tribal groups and to set us against one another. All in the name of oppression and victimization, or on the right, to set us against one another in the name of nationalism and ethnic pride. The identity politics game is tribalism, and playing that game is murderous, and it's as simple as that. And I've been trying to outline an alternative, and it's a classic Western alternative, I would say, a classic Western liberal alternative, even in the old school sense. And I've been lecturing online and writing in this book as well about the idea that the best way forward is for people to straighten up and to adopt responsibility and to try to put their lives in order and to be very careful with their speech and to say what they mean and to act forthrightly, and so that we can return to our individual predicated society and try to negotiate between the two shoals of this political polarization process. And so the book is a series of stories and arguments to flesh out that idea. that meaning in life, which is the antidote, the real antidote to chaos, I would say, is to be found in the adoption of responsibility and the willingness to struggle forward, regardless of your suffering, regardless of your victimization status, let's say. So,
well, I feel like I'm a victim. I'm an old white male. We seem to be the main targets.
Yeah, well, that's going to get worse before it gets better. So,
can't get much worse, can it?
Oh, yes.
Is it going to get worse?
Things can always get worse. There's no bottom to worse. So, yeah, well, I mean, these things are so foolish. I know your airline, Qantas, and this is something, it's absolutely remarkable to behold, in my estimation, is to see these corporations, which are obviously beneficiaries of the free market system, allowing the radical leftists into their ranks to determine the linguistic territory that they're going to inhabit. And I don't know what corporate leaders are thinking. Why in the world would you let in a radical leftist fifth column in the midst of your company? How is that going to be a good idea?
But what I find in that is that the workforce themselves are sensible enough to ignore this.
Yeah, well, that's not going to be the case for long, because what you'll see is that people who ignore it will be called out by the radicals who support it, and they will become increasingly cowed and afraid to use their normative language.
Is this only happening in the West?